Almost 10 years ago, my piano professor told me that I should quit music because I couldn't play the piano. And as composers, we are gonna face criticism, whether it's about our music or if it's about us. But after all these years, that one comment has stuck with me. That moment made me question my ability as a composer, as a musician. And for years, I have felt like an imposter, like I wasn't a composer. And when you tell somebody that you're a composer, you're a musician, the assumption is that one, you play an instrument or that you do play the piano. And I would just get really embarrassed because, to be honest, I don't really play any instruments. I love the music. I love learning the theory behind it. I love actual composition and notation working in my DAW, but I've always had to get around without playing an instrument. And to be fair, I do have more experience as a vocalist, as a singer, whether it be through ensemble groups or, musical theater. But for some reason, it felt like I couldn't truly call myself a composer because I couldn't do something that was so foundational, that was something that a lot of the greats can do. And the thing is, once I started comparing myself to every other composer, every other musician out there who could play the piano or any other instrument, it just brought me back to that one moment where I wasn't doing well in a piano class and that one professor decided to point it out. And I know that my experience isn't an isolated incident. There are so many creative people out there who deal with imposter syndrome and self-doubt on a regular basis. But when we're told that we're not good enough for the thing that we love to do, that we're passionate about, it's very easy to internalize that criticism. And it starts to affect not just our music, but the way we perceive ourselves as musicians. Now, for almost 10 years, that doubt has lingered in the back of my head. And even though I've composed music, I've built a career with other skills as well, like orchestration and theory and communication, there was always that little voice that would pop up and say, but you can't play the piano. And it was so frustrating because I thought I was doing all these different things that would qualify me as a composer. I thought that getting my Berklee certificate would make me feel like a true composer. Then I thought maybe getting a master's degree would do it. But even when I was getting paid to write music or tutor for the ThinkSpace bootcamp, it still didn't feel like enough. Like there was a time where I was a music teacher and I was teaching kids from pre-K to 8th grade. I would get so upset with myself because I couldn't play them something. I couldn't actually sit down and say, oh, listen to this and play it out on a whim. So instead I had to rely on my knowledge of technology and sample libraries and DAWs and orchestration and the history of instruments and all these other things around music. One method I would turn to pretty often would be arranging the music that I had to teach in a notation software like Noteflight. It was simple, it was easy, and actually a lot of kids really enjoyed learning that way. What I learned is that a lot of the kids felt like music class was fun, something that they could look forward to because it was new, it was different from what they've been learning in the past. And I didn't find out until a little bit later that the music teacher before me was there for nearly 50 years, and she exclusively sat behind a piano to play the music, to teach them, and have them sing out. She would hand out music theory, notation, worksheets, and that was kind of it. There wasn't really anything else to it. And the reason why I bring up that story is because it was one of the building blocks over the past 10 years of helping me come to realize that my worth as a composer, as an educator, as a musician isn't directly tied to one thing. It's not dependent on my ability to play a single instrument. I think it's easy for us as the default to call ourselves the thing, so like a composer. And that thing has a definition, but if we don't match that definition, then how can we call ourselves that thing? Instead, we are an individual who is a musician, who composes, who can teach, who can play an instrument, who can share stories through music. But I also know that self-doubt creeps in and, it's an ongoing process to work through. You don't just flip a switch and you no longer have self-doubt. So that's why I offer clarity sessions, so we can talk through maybe some of the roadblocks holding you back. And really the idea is just to identify some sort of path forward. So if you're feeling stuck or you're unsure of your best next step, then feel free to book a session. And just on a personal note, now after all of these years, I feel like I'm at a point where I can learn the piano, but on my own terms. I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I'm not doing this because of the professor. I think, if anything, I had to prove to myself that I can learn the piano, not because I should or have to, but because it's something that I genuinely want to do. And it took me a while to get to a point where, yes, that professor's words stung and they lingered for so long, but they didn't define me. And it took a long time to realize that. And I think after all these years, I have always said I wanted to learn the piano, but deep down, part of me was like, well, you can't. You're just not going to be good at it. You're not suited for it. But if I'm being honest, in the past, I really didn't do myself any favors in setting up the right environment or really prepping myself for success at actually practicing the piano. There's one book that I really enjoy and I turn to it every so often, and it's Atomic Habits by James Clear. And at one point he discusses how developing a habit can be much easier if you take little steps beforehand to prep yourself for that habit. So in the past, I've had my MIDI keyboard and I would say that this is what I would practice on, but that meant I had to rely on setting up my computer and loading up a Logic session and making sure I had the right piano installed and I'm working in front of a screen. And it usually made me feel like I had to jump through so many hoops in order to practice, and in turn, it made me not want to practice. And because I was sitting in front of my DAW, a place where I'm usually composing, it made me feel like I was wasting time by not actually composing. But now I'm so excited that I've actually invested in a digital piano that's separate from my workstation. It's a Yamaha P71 and it's simple. It doesn't have too many bells and whistles. I know that there's even better ones out there, but it feels like I can actually sit down and practice without getting distracted by a ton of other technology. There's no DAW, there's no samples, it's just me and the piano. And I think that's what really excites me the most, because I feel like I can give myself the permission to just get lost in music. And on top of that, I wanted to make sure I had the right environment. I also felt like I was losing inspiration every time I would walk into the studio because I wasn't necessarily tending to it. I was just letting things maybe pile up. So that meant I had to clear out a ton of clutter from the studio so that I can actually give myself some space. One, for the physical piano. It's an 88 key. It's by the window. I've set up a little fake plant, even though I would like to get some more real ones at some point. But it feels like I've made room for something new, both physically and mentally. Like, I'm actually excited to be in the studio again and allow myself to feel like I can grow as a musician. Now, I've just started practicing. I'm trying to remember everything I learned from that class. And now I'm just looking for a way for me to practice the piano in a way that works for me, in a way that works for my schedule. I've had this piano book for years, but never really stuck with it because I wasn't actively learning the piano. I'm also trying out something called Flex Lessons, which is kind of like this asynchronous, do-it-yourself way to practice the piano, which I think is really cool. I could always search for a local piano tutor, and of course, there are a ton of piano YouTube channels out there. So if you have recommendations that have worked for you when learning an instrument, when learning the piano, feel free to let me know in the comments. I am definitely open to suggestions. But before I really get started, I just want to make sure I'm following some sort of structure and I have a goal in mind when approaching learning the piano. For example, one of the things I would love to get better at is actually improvising. This is definitely something that would help me just as a composer explore music a bit better. It'll help me break out of the same chords that I fall back to. And I really just want to be able to feel more free when I sit down at a piano. And so to help me stay on track, I'm setting this up just as a quarterly goal, or what I usually call a quarterly odyssey. So over the next 3 months, I really want to focus on why I'm doing this in the first place. And I can always come back and rewatch this video myself. I'm then going to dedicate specific times of the week, literally put it down in my calendar where it's almost like a meeting. Like, this is what I'm doing. It's just part of my day. And then the important part is I also want to make sure I come up with options or ways to approach unexpected challenges that might arise over the next 3 months. This way I'm holding myself accountable, not just by saying I'm going to learn the piano and then never actually doing anything about it, but I know that I've set aside time dedicated to this one thing. I've been wanting to learn the piano for obviously these 10 years, but even beyond that, this is something that I'm just really excited about, and I feel proud of myself that after all this time, I'm doing it not to prove a certain person wrong. I'm doing it not because I want to say I'm a composer now. I feel like I've been able to overcome those hurdles, or at least I'm more conscious and aware of them. And I'm doing this now because it's just something I'm passionate about. It's something that will help me feel more connected to my music and expand as a composer. And if you're trying to overcome your own obstacles or set up your own goals, then definitely reach out through those clarity sessions. And until then, you might want to check out these videos next. I'll see you over there. And as always, happy composing.